Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
So I came across a man called Bjorn Eriksson and thought that, well, it's about time we got him on the program. He's a former president of Interpol and he's a former national police commissioner in Sweden. So he's a big cheese. And he runs a group called Cash Rebellion. There is a name for it, but I can't pronounce it. It's Contantupparet or something like that. But it means Cash Rebellion. He's running this group, and he talks about identity theft, consumer debt, and cyber attacks. He wants to prevent the rollout of this agenda. Now, as I said, he's a former president of Interpol. There is so much I would have liked to have spoken with him about in terms of Interpol, but we couldn't get into that today. And of course, being a former National Police Commissioner, I would have liked to talk to him about migrant problems, but I couldn't do that either because we agreed to talk about the cashless society. Very interesting man. Caught up with him today. It's not a long piece. It's only 15 minutes, but listen to what he had to say. This is Bjorn Eriksson in conversation with me a little bit earlier. Bjorn Eriksson, thanks so much for agreeing to come on the programme today. Tell us, what are the most worrying implications for you if Sweden was to go cashless by 2030? What are you most concerned about?
I think the major concerns are probably three. The first one being that this system is going to be rather vulnerable, both for in a situation when we might be hacked or when Russia or some other country want to do something, or to be a little bit of a one-liner, if Putin decides to do something, why occupy our islands, just cut off our payment system, or we are going to have tremendous difficulties. Secondly, there are groups that are not ready or don't have the possibility to work, because cash, after all, is the lender of last resort. You can dig them down, you can do a lot of things with them, but for elderly people, rural areas, etc., I'm afraid they're going to be left aside. And thirdly, this is a decision because you decided that this is up to the banks to decide. You took away the political implement, and that is a mistake, because this is really a political question.
Isn't that the most serious of all the concerns, Bjorn? Handing complete control over an individual's finances, total control to a central bank. That would for me, would be the most scary of all those implications, right?
It scares me too, because the fact that everything is registered means that from an integrity point of view, you're going to be you're going to have difficulties. This could very well be amended as a fourth very strong reason for being very doubtful.
Because when you look at it from a basic point of view, whatever money is in my bank account today, Bjorn, belongs to me. And if I want to extract it from the bank, and if I want to hold it personally and take it out of the bank, I should be able to do that. But in a cashless society future, I wouldn't ever be able to physically take my cash.
That is a problem. If you take that to the situation today with an interest that is negative, I wonder what happens if you have, let's say, £2,000, and somebody from the bank calls you and says, nowadays, according to our opinion, you just have 19,000. The rest is a fee. How do you defend yourself? In the good old days, you could use cash to be sure that you are not just 100% forced to obey the banks. So it's a good point.
The government says, the Swedish government says, and other governments that are proposing this, and we're seeing this pop up in China, in Japan, in the Republic of Ireland, in Cork City, and in many other places. They say by going cashless, we can improve, we can increase the tax intake, we can tax people better and more fair. But that doesn't stand up either to me, Bjorn, because the biggest tax avoiders in our society are some of the biggest companies in the world. I'm not sure I agree with the tax implications. So when the government says tax is a big issue, what do you say to that?
For me, tax is a question that you decide upon in democratic order, and I don't think that is a particularly good argument, because after all, you are saying then that you control everything. My opinion is that you take a political decision and then you have to follow it, but that people can control your income 100% and put you in a situation where you can't defend themselves. That's my problem. Cash might be a little thing for many people, but it's the last resort, so to say, the way you can protect yourself. So I think I will stick to cash and use cards at the same time. It's my choice, not somebody else.
There's no doubt that the poorest people in society, the most vulnerable people, it's going to be a huge problem for them, Bjorn, right?
That is true, but not only for them. If you take my mother, 97 years of age, she would never be able to handle a card for different reasons. That means that she would have to leave all the details, all the figures, all the codes, etc., to somebody else to help her. And that is not fair. I think we have a responsibility for those people that have problems for different say to handle cards.
One of the things that we speak a lot about on this program is freedom of speech and privacy, Bjorn. And we know that certain financial institutions in recent times, they blocked payments to Wikipedia, of course. That's a huge concern, that, isn't it? I mean, along with freedom of speech, my right to support, whether it's an independent media organisation or whether it's WikiLeaks, Wikipedia, whatever, I should have the right to do that. But of course, in a cashless society, the government basically the central bank can say, no, you don't get to do that. That's a massive concern. That it's very much Orwellian, Bjorn, I would say.
You can see tendencies of that sort. We had a case in my country when somebody was delivering films you could rent, which was not particularly nice. And the decision from the card people was, we don't accept your cards any longer. Might be good from some sort of moral and other point of view, but still they got a power that is doubtful if they should have. Just as an example, cash is a complement to the least. So I see no reason to take away cash because that gives you as an individual a possibility to defend yourself.
Absolutely right, yeah. I mean, we have groups of people, not criminals, but people who work in activism, speaking up for the rights of people in Palestine and elsewhere in the world. And whether you agree with it or not, in a cashless society, those groups of people could be prevented from organising and could be prevented from doing what they do. That's kind of totalitarianism, I think. What do you think?
Well, I put it maybe a similar way, but I will express it like this. It's my option if I use cards or cash. I see no reason to take away from me that option. I personally use card a lot, but not 100%. So it's that possibility that you choose as an individual. That's my point.
But not to labour this point, Bjorn, but isn't that the real... What I'm trying to get at is, for me, what I see to be the real reason behind introducing the cashless agenda. And I would go as far as to suggest that maybe the introduction of the single currency in Europe was maybe a pretext to all of this. Do you connect those dots? Can you see that the introduction of the single currency in Europe was basically part of this agenda to ultimately maybe bring in a global cashless currency? What do you think?
I don't think that was the intention from the beginning. And actually, for me, the important thing is not if there is a mean person trying to cheat us. I think a lot of people believe in this because it's easy, it's simple, etc., etc. But the problem is it might be simple, easy, etc., but it has a drawback that a lot of people don't realize. And I think that's good enough to make sure that you should have cash as an alternative for so many years you can see ahead.
You're giving the financial networks of the world the benefit of the doubt, Bjorn, when in recent history, recent history would suggest that the financial powerhouses of the world, they certainly don't operate in our best interests. So why would we trust that they're operating in our interests now?
It could be, but for me, I mean, we are many people that don't like the option to take away cash. And everybody can believe in his religion, so to say. But for me, the most important thing is that you take away an option and you take away a possibility to go and use cash because you like it. That's good enough for me. I don't have to amend that people are mean, etc. I don't think they thought this through. And I think a lot of car lovers really love cars. Good for me. But give me the possibility to use cash when I wish.
Well, listen, I totally understand that, and I respect it. I respect the reason you're concerned about it and your organisation, which I will tweet links to when the programme is live. But the point I'm making is it's very important. There are huge implications here for freedom of speech, for personal expression, for the rights to express who you are, and the rights to spend your money however you want to spend it. There are huge implications for that. It goes beyond an inconvenience is what I'm saying, basically.
Yes, and I think what could be an extra point, if when we are listening to this discussion, is why is this introduced without an open debate? It just happens because the banks have been given the possibility to put up the rules of the game, so to say. And that is, from a democratic point of view, not particularly good.
Bjorn, who's responsible? Because and I mentioned this to your lovely assistant, Josephine, today, speaking with her over email. You just touched on the most important thing. Banks have basically taken control of this decision, and they're being allowed to do that. Who's responsible for that then? Is it the Swedish government or successive Swedish governments?
I think you could put the blame there, but I also think that the central bank were a little bit careless 2005 when they accepted that this should from then onwards be a question for the 4 or 5 major banks rather than the central bank itself. So I think they have to share the blame, so to say.
And what about your organisation then? How do you go about trying to get this on the agenda in Sweden? Because you're nearly there now. You're nearly at the point where it's cashless. So how does your organisation go about getting this on the agenda?
We are trying to have a lot of other organizations to join us, the organization for retired people, security industry, etc., etc., etc. And we are trying the best we can to make this a question for the general election next year, because I think the trick here is that to put the question on the political agenda so there is a debate. And it's my hope that political parties will realize that people are rather upset about what's happening, because that's my feeling. So the goal is try to get this get the thing as a political question.
I think you're doing a good job. The final point I want to make is, look, I've got very strong opinions about banks and the power to create money. We know we live in a fractional reserve banking system. Banks loan money into existence, which is an extraordinary power, by the way, that our governments have given banks to create money out of thin air. and basically own. Banks basically control society anyway, from top to bottom, because the person who controls the money supply controls life, and that's the situation we're in. I believe, Bjorn, that back in 2008, we should have allowed banks to become bankrupt. We should have allowed banks to disappear, and we should have let, new banks could have been formed, and we could have taken ownership of banks. In a future cashless society, are we basically giving banks immunity from anything, immunity from prosecution, immunity from bankruptcy? In this future society, banks become untouchable, right?
I see your point, and I can't judge that, but I could put it in this way. The fact that they control the payment system is a major problem in itself.
Well, I wish your organisation all the very best, Bjorn. As you can probably guess, I'm very, very much against the introduction of...
I haven't missed that.
You haven't missed that much, right? So you understand that. So we'll link to your organisation. We do have listeners in Sweden, of course, and we ask people to support you there. I appreciate you giving us the time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
That was Bjorn Eriksson. Now, he's a former National Police Commissioner in Sweden and a former president of Interpol. So you could hear there that he was being pretty careful with the answers that he gave. And his group, which I mentioned earlier on, and I will tweet a link to it, even though the website is in Swedish in a few minutes' time, are trying to roll back or reverse this process, which is nearly complete anyway. He mentioned at the very beginning, didn't he, that, he's concerned that Putin's Russia might try to hack the Swedish financial system. Of course, the biggest threat to the people of Sweden in a cashless society is not the Russian government or the North Korean government or anybody else, but it's the banking system that will own lock, stock and barrel will own society, will own the country if it doesn't own it already. And we talked about there, and I tried to press upon him the point that individual liberty, individual freedom disappears out the window the minute that you must pay for something digitally. You must use your phone. Of course, the phone rollout is all part of this agenda as well. The ability to congregate, the ability to support something you think should be supported. All of these things, of course, come into play when you talk about the cashless society. Anybody who's read David Icke, the Perception, Deception, or Phantom Self, or any of David's books, he's been talking about this for years, and it seems to be gathering pace now. Last year, 1% only of transactions in Sweden right across society were made using cash.